Picture this, October 29th, 1929, a day that would go down in history as Black Tuesday. The stock market crashes, banks fail, businesses shutter, jobs, once plentiful, vanish like smoke in the wind, and savings, the lifeline families clung onto, evaporate into thin air. Welcome to the onset of the Great Depression, an era that tested the mettle of families across America and beyond. Food, once abundant, now became a scarce luxury. Grocery stores, as we know them, didn't exist. There were no food stamps to cushion the blow, no social safety nets to fall back on. Survival was no longer about stretching your dollars, it was about stretching your imagination and your resourcefulness. Most families had to rely on what they could grow, what they could raise, or what they could forage. Backyard gardens sprouted, chicken coops clucked, and hands that had never known soil learned to plant, to sow, to reap. The land became their lifeline, their grocery store, their means of survival. But what if you didn't have land? What if your garden failed, your chickens didn't lay, your foraging came up empty? You had to barter, to trade, to scavenge. You had to rely on the kindness of neighbors, the generosity of strangers, the community that pulled together in the face of adversity. In the shadow of the Great Depression, creativity and resourcefulness were not just desirable traits, they were survival skills. Every scrap of food was precious, every meal a blessing, every full stomach a victory against the odds. The Great Depression was not just an economic downturn, it was a test of human resilience. They learned to make do with less, to appreciate the simple things, to value community over individualism. They had to find new ways to feed themselves, new ways to stretch their meals, new ways to make every morsel count. These were the lessons of the Great Depression, lessons that remain relevant even today. In a time of scarcity, nothing went to waste. When the Great Depression gripped the world, it took more than grit and determination to survive. It took resourcefulness and a keen sense of thrift. Food was scarce, and people had to make do with what they had. But in the face of adversity, they found ingenious ways to make the most of every morsel. Scraps that would ordinarily be discarded were given a new lease on life. Bones, for example, were simmered for hours to create nourishing broths. These broths served as the base for hearty soups and stews, providing a warming, filling meal that was both economical and delicious. And it wasn't just bones that were repurposed. Potato peels, often thrown away in our modern kitchens, were transformed into a nutritious soup base. This not only reduced waste but also provided essential vitamins and minerals to the diet. Even stale bread, which would typically be tossed out, found its way back to the table. It was reborn as bread pudding or dumplings, simple but satisfying dishes that offered comfort in trying times. The principle of zero waste was not limited to food. Every resource was precious, and everything had a purpose. Bacon grease, for instance, was saved and used for cooking, adding flavor and richness to dishes. Old clothes were mended or repurposed, and nothing was thrown away until it had outlived its usefulness. The mantra, "waste not, want not," took on a whole new meaning during this time. It became more than just a saying, it became a way of life. It was a survival strategy, a means of making ends meet when it seemed impossible. And it served as a reminder that even in the darkest times, resourcefulness and creativity can light the way forward. The lessons from this period in history are as relevant today as they were then, especially for those preparing for uncertain times ahead. After all, the art of zero waste is not just about making do, it's about making the most of what you have. When every penny counted, families turned to the most affordable and versatile food items. The Great Depression was a time of scarcity, but even in the midst of hardship, people found ways to nourish their families with simple, yet inventive meals. Beans and bread were the superheroes of the pantry. These staples were not only affordable, but they were also filling and could be used in countless ways. A pot of beans could feed a family for days, and the leftover bread was never wasted. It was transformed into bread pudding or dumplings, offering a touch of comfort in tough times. Potatoes, cabbage, and onions were the triumvirate of the vegetable garden. Their long shelf life and versatility made them a cornerstone of the Depression-era diet. And let's not forget about cornmeal and lard. These two ingredients were a dynamic duo, appearing in everything from fried mush to hoe cakes. But it wasn't just about the ingredients, it was about how they were used. Families got creative with stretch recipes that could feed many mouths with few resources. Dishes like Hoover stew, boiled cabbage, ketchup soup, and even vinegar pie were born out of necessity, but they became symbols of resilience and ingenuity. And believe it or not, these Depression-era recipes still hold value today. In an age of convenience and abundance, it's easy to forget the lessons of the past. But if you ever find yourself in need, or simply want to stretch your grocery budget, these recipes offer a roadmap. A pot of beans, a loaf of bread, a patch of potatoes. These humble ingredients can be transformed into meals that are not only nourishing, but also comforting and flavorful. So, the next time you're in the kitchen, consider trying your hand at a stretch recipe. Whether it's a pot of Hoover stew or a pan of hoe cakes, you'll be tapping into a legacy of resilience and resourcefulness that has been passed down through generations. Ingenuity in the kitchen was the secret to keeping bellies full, and in our modern world, it's a skill worth remembering. Preserving food wasn't just a hobby, it was a necessity. It was the lifeline of every family during the Great Depression, ensuring that they had a food supply that would last them through the harsh winter months. It was a time when the concept of fresh produce at your doorstep was a distant dream. Instead, people had to rely on their knowledge and skills to stretch their food supplies. Canning was a common method of food preservation. It was a laborious process, but it paid off in the long run. Fruits, vegetables, and even meats were canned at home using a simple water bath or pressure canner. This method effectively killed bacteria and other microorganisms, while the sealed jars kept the food safe from contamination. Root cellars were another crucial piece of the puzzle. These were essentially underground storage spaces that used the Earth's natural insulation to maintain a cool and stable temperature. Vegetables like potatoes, onions, and carrots, as well as fruits like apples and pears, were stored in these cellars, sometimes lasting through the entire winter. Dehydration was another preservation technique that was widely used. By simply removing the water content, the growth of bacteria and fungi was significantly slowed down, extending the shelf life of the food. Fruits, vegetables, and even meats were dried and stored for future use. Pickling and salting were other methods that families used. By immersing food in vinegar or covering it in salt, the growth of bacteria was inhibited, preserving the food. This wasn't just limited to cucumbers and cabbages, even meats and fish were preserved this way. The key takeaway here is that preservation was more than just a way to store food, it was a survival strategy. It embodied the essence of waste not, want not. Every morsel was precious, and every scrap had potential. This mindset of preservation and resourcefulness was what kept families fed during those difficult years. Preservation was a lifeline, ensuring families had food through the winter months. It's a lesson from the past that still holds value today. Whether it's for practical reasons, economic reasons, or even just for the sheer joy of it, preserving food is a skill that deserves to be preserved itself. When the money ran out, trade became the currency of survival. In the heart of the Great Depression, cash was scarce, if not non-existent, for many families. This harsh reality forced people to tap into the age-old practice of bartering, a system where goods or services are directly exchanged for other goods or services without using a medium of exchange such as money. Bartering was no stranger to the people of this era. Many were only a generation or two removed from pioneers who had relied on trading to establish their homesteads. Now they were using the same skills to keep food on their tables. Common items that were traded ranged from the tangible to the intangible. Chickens, eggs, milk, flour, and firewood were all valuable commodities. But so too were skills and services. A handyman might trade a day's labor for a sack of potatoes. A seamstress might mend clothes in exchange for a dozen eggs. Every trade mattered, every exchange held value. Bartering wasn't without its challenges. It required a keen sense of value and negotiation skills. One had to know the worth of their goods or services and be able to haggle for a fair trade. But in a world where money had lost its value, this was the new economy. Bartering also played a crucial role in fostering a sense of community. It wasn't just about survival, but about helping each other out. Neighbors exchanged goods, shared meals, and supported each other through the toughest of times. But perhaps the most important aspect of bartering was the lesson it taught about the true value of things. It highlighted that in times of crisis, the worth of a good or service isn't measured by its price tag, but by its utility and necessity. Bartering was a lifeline, keeping families fed when times were tough. It was a testament to human resilience, creativity, and the ability to adapt to even the harshest of circumstances. And as we'll see, these qualities were just as important in the kitchen as they were in the marketplace. Cooking during the Great Depression required precision and creativity. Every meal was a well-thought-out plan. There was no room for extravagance or waste. Ingredients were chosen with care, making sure every bit could be used. Leftovers weren't discarded, they were cleverly transformed into future meals. Soup, for instance, was a common dish that could be stretched over several days, incorporating any leftovers from previous meals. But it wasn't just about being efficient, it was also about being innovative. When the usual ingredients were not available or too expensive, people got creative. They invented what came to be known as mock dishes. Like mock apple pie, you ask? Exactly. When apples were scarce, ingenious cooks made pies using crackers, spices, and a bit of sweetener. These mock dishes might not have been the real deal, but they provided comfort and a semblance of normalcy during tough times. Cooking wasn't just about feeding the family, it was about surviving. The Great Depression offers valuable lessons for today's preppers. In a world where we often take abundance for granted, it can be a powerful exercise to look back at times when scarcity was the norm. The practices of the Depression era, from zero-waste cooking to bartering, serve as a blueprint for survival. Learning how to create Depression meals now is not just a fun history lesson, it's a practical skill. Many of these dishes are shelf-stable and affordable, making them ideal for a prepper's pantry. And it's not just about cooking. It's about practicing zero-waste habits and food preservation methods before you need them. The Great Depression also teaches us the value of bartering, self-reliant food production, and community support networks. In a world without money, these became the currency of survival. The lessons of the past can guide us in the times of hardship that may come in the future.